Hello there friends, welcome back to the channel where today's video is going to be focused on building an effective deer fence for your garden. Now out here on the T&T farm, we don't actually have any deer that live on the property, but we're surrounded by cornfields, soybean fields, cow pastures and woods. And what we do get is a lot of cross deer traffic here on the property. I've got evidence of that on the security cameras. I've seen them with my own eyes running through the property. And unfortunately, they have damaged a number of my smaller fruit trees. So they come in the spring when they're getting their antlers and they decide to strip the bark off one side of a tree. Now I'm working on a solution to protect my fruit trees, but I'm also protecting my garden. So this is what should be, I think, the fourth year for our garden here, and it's been growing every year, and this year is no different. And for the last 2 years, I've had a deer fence around my garden that has worked well. Now remember, the deer fence that I'm going to be building and I'm going to be showing you isn't intended to be a physical barrier for the deer, but it does act as a visual or sensory barrier to the deer. So if they really wanted to, they could probably charge right through it. But what happens is they get up to it, they touch it, and they can't figure out how to get over it or around it. And apparently for deer, that's enough. I've read some stories and watched some videos of people just using a few lines of fish line to keep the deer away from their garden. The deer come up and touch it, and then they back off. But that's not the solution I'm going with. I'm going with a 7-foot mesh fence. Now the mesh deer fence isn't going to keep out the raccoons and the possums and that sort of stuff, so I do pair it with a electric poultry net that I get from Starkline, and that keeps the little critters out, and the 7-foot fence is what's going to keep out the deer. And it's worked so far for the last couple years, so I've got confidence in it continuing to work. So this year I'm in the process, very wet and mucky at the moment, but I did a big garden expansion. So I increased the size of my planting beds by about 50% in here. And so I had to move the deer fence and the electric fence. And I decided to upgrade or do some modifications to my deer fence in the process. Now when I first put up the deer fence a couple years ago, I put my T-posts at about 20 feet apart. And although that's a mesh net that you probably can't see until I get closer, it does still catch wind like a sail to a degree. And I found out that 20-foot spacing just isn't close enough. So this year I've gone back and added an in-between T-post in every section. So now my spacing is about 9 to 10 feet apart all the way around the garden. What I used was 8-foot T-posts, and when I get up close, you will see the mesh that I have over it. Now I have run a string along the top all the way around, and that is to lace over what's left over of the mesh. And the reason I did that is important, because down here at the bottom, what I've done is I left about 8 inches off the ground where the net starts. The first time I did it, I had to go all the way to the ground, which got messy when I tried to trim the grass, and the trimmer would get caught in the mesh and gunk up my trimmer and tear up my fence. So this time I'm leaving about 8 inches clear. I'm still going to have the poultry net on the outside. I'm not worried about the deer fence to keep the little critters out. But now I'll be able to come along here and trim quite easily. But by the time I drive my 8-foot T-posts in, my 7-foot mesh net does have a little bit left over at the top that I just fold over that rope and then zip tie in different places. The first time I did this and put up the fence, I used a mesh I got on Amazon. It came in a 7-foot by 100 foot, and it was all compacted into basically a small roll that was all tangly. You had to unroll it and then unfold it and then unfold it. It was kind of a pain. But what I found was this particular product at Tractor Supply. It is also 7-foot by 100 foot, comes on a big roll. You don't have to unfold it after you unroll it, which is nice. But more importantly, and you're not going to be able to tell, but the mesh itself is, I would guess, 3 times thicker than the one that I got on Amazon before. Now, even though the one I got before was being sold as a deer fence, and it worked as a deer fence, it was probably more appropriate to use kind of to cover a fruit tree to keep the birds off it. It was a lot more lightweight, and that with the 20-foot spacing of the T-posts did a little bit of abuse, because the only way I attach this to those posts is with zip ties. And if you only put 4 zip ties over 7 feet and you get the wind and 20 feet, you do get a couple tear outs you got to fix. So far I've had half the garden done for about a month. We got a lot of heavy winds. This is holding up extremely well so far. But since I only have half the garden done, means I have half the garden left to do, and that is what we're going to be working on today. Putting a few more 100 feet of this mesh around our garden to keep the deer out. So unfortunately it's starting to rain, so I'm going to run up to the barn, but before I do, I just wanted to say, how do I address the openings where I drive the tractor through? Well, because I'm using a poultry net, so this gate, you can see the extra poultry net there, will span the gap, and then above it what I do is I run 2 ropes from one post to the other with a clamp or a clip on one side, so I can just disconnect the 2 ropes over here, lay them to the side, move the poultry net, and drive through. So whatever solution you come up with, if you're not using a poultry net, I'd be interested to find out below how you deal with gates and openings, but that's the method that I use. But anyway, let's run up to the barn and wrap up this video. Well, we made it back to the barn. And unfortunately, we still have that 50 feet left to do, but we'll do that another day. Got a lot done today before the second bout of rain. This one's not going to let up for the rest of the day, so we've run short on time. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this video on how here at the TNT farm, we deal with keeping the deer out using a 7-foot mesh fence on T-posts. Lesson learned, keep them about 10 feet apart. Don't space them too far apart, puts too much stress on that net. And also the net that you get at Tractor Supply, or at least I can get at Tractor Supply, is a lot thicker, and I think it's going to hold up a lot longer. Now I've got about 470, 480 feet of fence to go around my newly expanded garden. I figure the cost of that fence, including the T-posts, all of them, and the mesh, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $850. Now that's a lot of money to protect a garden. You got to grow an awful lot of vegetables to make $850. But the good news is the majority of that cost is in the T-posts, and you should never have to replace those T-posts. I'm expecting the fence to last, based on my experience with the previous one I had up, a good 5 years. So it's going to cost me about $300 every 5 years to replace that fence, potentially. Hopefully it lasts a little bit longer. So when you look at it that way, it's about $60 a year once you've put it up to maintain it on average. And that's not a bad investment, because nothing's worse than seeing your crop ready to pick, come back the next day and something's got in there and tore it up, whether it be a deer, a raccoon, a possum, or whatever. But anyway, if you have any questions or comments about this video or any of my videos, as always, leave them in the comments below. Before you leave, give this video a big thumbs up. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, so that we can see you in the next video. Thanks again. Bye-bye. So now we're going to take a quick break to thank this week's sponsor. And this week's sponsor, like every week's sponsor, is me, Chris Gladstone with TNT Try New Things, where I have started a new website link. Partnering with Buy Me a Coffee is an opportunity for you to check out some of the items I have for sale that you have probably watched the videos on me making. It's also an opportunity to sponsor the channel directly, either through buying me a coffee, or if you're feeling particularly generous, signing up for an annual membership. With that, I'm going to go back to the video.